Welcome to the Ministry Forum podcast, where we believe that you are not alone in your ministry journey. I'm the Reverend John Borthwick, your host, coming to you from the Center for Lifelong Learning at Knox College. Here we connect, encourage, and resource ministry leaders all across Canada in the joys, the struggles, and everything in between. I love that I get to do this work, and most of all that I get to share it with each and every one of you. So thanks for giving us a listen today. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out, this podcast is made with you in mind. This week on the Ministry Forum podcast, we are sharing a recast of a conversation that we had way back in May of last year. This is with the Reverend Dr. Jeff Crittenden, who we invited to our We Need to Listen session at the Ministry Forum. If you've never been to a We Need to Listen session, essentially it's what it says it is. It is a time of listening to one another, and sometimes we gather people into the virtual space. We do it monthly, and we gather them in to just have a conversation about whatever's on their hearts, minds, or spirits in that moment. Those are probably the richest conversations we have. But occasionally we also invite a guest to share, to tell us something about that they're passionate about, to share about their ministry, life. Maybe they've written a book. Maybe they've done some interesting things, and we are called to listen to them as they share. And so we were in for a treat way back in May last year when the Reverend Dr. Jeff Crittenden joined us. He's the minister at St. Andrew's United Church in Toronto on Bloor Street and is the co-founder of the Center for Practical Theology and is also an author of Leisure Resurrected. He joined us on the We Need to Listen session and shared so much about his ministry and his work, his book, and the work of the center when he was back in London originally at Metropolitan United Church there in London. Jeff's an engaging speaker, certainly a very passionate individual in the things that he is passionate about, and we were so grateful that he took some time to share his passion with us and that we got a chance to listen to him. And so now I invite you to listen to this recast of our conversation with Jeff Crittenden. You may hear some other voices on this podcast of some of our participants as they engaged Jeff in questions. Looking forward to sharing this with you, and enjoy the listening.
Thank you. I'll introduce myself, and then I have two different sets of slides to walk through, but it's really about you. It's about us talking through ideas and what we're imagining and so forth. Does that sound good to you? Yeah. Okay. So my name's Jeff. It's my 30th year in ordained ministry, and I've been a minister for 35 some years, coast to coast to coast, all across Canada. Dad's a preacher. Grandmother was a lay preacher in the Methodist Church, so it's a long history in the United Church. But I've always played well with others, and so when I did some of my degrees, did my first degree with the Jesuits in Sudbury, and they told me I dated too much to be a priest, so they sent me to McGill. And there I got to meet your beloved Dr. Klempa, who was a guy who kept telling me, Karl Barth, pay attention to him. Karl Barth, Karl Barth, Karl Barth. So I was at UTC for United Theological College in Montreal for 2 degrees. Left there and was settled in the United Church of Canada, where we used to be settled, sent to your first place. We don't preach for a call, but not anymore, but we used to get sent out. So I left downtown Montreal and moved to Bow Island, so southern Alberta. And this describes the entire experience to begin. We got there, we drove right through the town because we thought it was the light industrial area outside of the village. Found out as we turned around that no, that is the settlement place, Bow Island. And again, to describe it, there was one stop sign at a 4-way stop. And that's how we began our ministry. And I can say that everything I learned about ministry, I learned there and just had a fabulous experience. Stayed 5 years. I did a Master of Theology in Leisure and Theology at St. Stephen's College, University of Alberta. And then the story gets a little bit complicated, but for the sake of this call, I started a PhD at the University of Alberta in leisure studies. So I was in recreation, kinesiology, and so forth. Things didn't work out so well with my advisor for a variety of reasons, which isn't uncommon. But my secondary advisor was Dominic Crossan. And so he transferred everything to the University of Chicago for me. And there I got started, moved to Ontario to start a new pastorate. And while I was in the University of Chicago, transferred, and this is where the Presbyterians come, to McCormick. So I did my DMin in homiletics in McCormick, and I did it in African American preaching. So I spent my entire time at Trinity. So I was with Jeremiah Wright and with Otis Moss, who was one of my classmates, and I just got to study with these incredible theologians and preachers. So after I was finished that, I went back to the PhD while I was serving, and I finished it at St. Mary's, again, to finish with the Catholics. So at St. Mary's in the UK, Twickenham, and I finished it in theology and in leisure studies. So with all those pieces together, I've been fascinated with Sabbath, leisure, pilgrimage, all those aspects of ministry that we often take for granted or don't pay much attention to. So that's what I was going to talk about this morning. Is that okay? So Leisure Resurrected, I've been working on since about 2000. So it's really a 25-year project that I've been working on, but it was always destined to become a piece of theology, because we talk about Sabbath, but we needed to expand into the Western world. And what happened in particular was when COVID happened, when we had this experience of COVID together, all of a sudden we had this radical moment in time that we all got to experience authentic leisure. Leisure is not the opposite of work. That's what most people think. You have work and leisure, work and recreation, work and leisure is not. When we go back to the ancients, which we're going to do in a minute, when they're talking about leisure, they're talking about flourishing, about becoming fully human, fully alive. And they'll ultimately argue, and we'll get to this with Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and so forth, that worship becomes one of the ultimate expressions of human existence, of being fully alive as a human. Now, they aren't thinking Christian worship, but they are talking about the great mysteries, nous, and how it is that when we're fully human, connected with the holy other, how is it that we then understand what it is to be fully human? And in those moments, they would argue, and I would argue, that we have leisure. The reason why I say this is that the opposite of leisure isn't work. The opposite of leisure is occupation, when you're occupied by something. So you could be on a beach in an idyllic scene, completely free of anything going on. But if you have a sick child and you're constantly thinking about that child and what can I do, and I should be there and I should be, then you're not at leisure. Just like you can be at work, for example, those who preach, and you can be right in the moment of flow when your ability and the task at hand gather together, and you can have a leisure experience even though you're at work and your time is not your own, or it's paid for, or we could go on with many examples. So the opposite of leisure is preoccupation, not work. And so when you begin thinking about leisure and what makes us fully human, we come into, as I said, this time of COVID. So people had all kinds of time, and added to that time, there were some restraints, of course, and added to the restraints were the understanding that we are going to have to figure out as a community how people are going to live. Well, within the constraints, it wasn't long before the government, as most of us lived through and remember, were able to provided a basic income. People were given enough money to be able to live. Not everyone. I'm fully aware that some people had, 8 children in a high rise with no opportunity to be able to go outside. And some people were in the streets, where I got to spend a lot of my time during COVID dealing with people that were lack of housing, mental health. And so I'm fully aware of some of the restrictions. For the majority of people, they had time and they had enough resource. It's what they chose to do with that. Now we come to the leisure. And so we know when COVID began, from our research that we're starting to gather now, is that a lot of people, family units, or people who became in their little pods, you could choose one person, 2 people, depending on what province you're in and how your government responded. people began gardening, began baking, they began doing all these things as family in the togetherness. And they were doing things that they hadn't done, or they had learned how to knit, or they were remembering how to garden, or my grandparents gardened, so now I'm going to garden, or whatever it was. And most people would walk. They would spend a lot of time walking at a distance. So they had time, they had money, generally resource. And it wasn't long, we know within a few weeks, that a lot of these leisure pursuits of gardening, baking, knitting, all these things that people were engrossed in, it wasn't within a few weeks were then abandoned. And the highest rate became in Netflix, cable television, anything to do to pass the time. And so we had this opportunity for people to begin to paint, study, but majority of people then flipped to programming that then informed them, as opposed to co-creating together. So into this time, we began to talk about what kind of leisure do we have? Well, Dr. Stebbins, and he's a leisure studies person, he comes from the University of Calgary, and he came with a leisure theory. And he says, if we have a choice, we have free time and the ability resource, we have the potential for having leisure. And so he defines leisure to casual leisure, which is play, relaxation, passive entertainment, like watching Netflix or scrolling Facebook, or that was casual leisure that people were engaging in. There was project-based leisure, like a one-time occasional, like if you had a birthday party or a festival or a church service, you could have a project-based leisure. Or there was serious leisure, and you would use your volunteer time. So a number of people were delivering groceries. People were checking in on their neighbor. They were driving to bring medicine to people. Some were hobbyists, like stamp collecting. There was the amateur sports. So a number of people took up jogging and working out at home and so forth. And they got quite serious and intentional about it. And then in serious leisure, you're a devotee. As you're using your leisure, it becomes a source of income. And a number of people started companies and so forth during this COVID time. They used the time to plan and to figure out their web presence or how it was they were going to move forward as we moved out of COVID. So Dr. Stebbins put together this theory in the 70s, and we still are working through what it is that he had offered to us as leisure. So everything's closed. We've got the restrictions. We've got all this time. We've got resource. And churches, I'm going to move to us now. Churches have an opportunity to figure out how is it we're going to connect. And we know from many of us instantly, we've got all this online streaming. We're streaming worship services. People are pre-recording them. They're sending daily messages, and we're starting to connect through the internet in particular. Or some churches, what they did is they put outside of their building things for people to pick up. So they could go for their walk and pick up items like packs for children to work at church activities, or there was a place for you to put donations in, or if you had prayer requests and so forth, either done online or through the churches. But COVID forced us to begin talking about leisure. So modern leisure today, we talk about discretionary time, free time activity, your personal experience, and your state of being. So if you were talking about leisure with your friends, you would say, yeah, I've got the weekend to go off and ride my bicycle, or I'm going to go picnic, or I'm going on a vacation. I've set aside the time. There's an activity involved. I'm hoping to have a personal experience. So when you read a book, you're hoping to be moved by the book, or to laugh, or to informed, or if you're listening to music. And then there's the state of being. How is it that I'm developing or growing in my skill? So for example, someone who's knitting, how am I learning different ways of doing knitting? Or how am I learning to make a scarf or socks, which require a different skill set? That'd be modern leisure. That's not how the ancients thought of leisure. And this is where I want to go back to. And I think when we talk about ancient leisure, you'll see where the church today can go back to learn from what we did in the first 3 centuries of our existence and what we can begin to reclaim, which I think people will find of tremendous value today. That's modern leisure. Now we're at classical leisure. So in classical leisure, which I think we can go back to learn a great deal from, the first we have mythology, which we'll deal with first. Second, out of the mythology, this is Western leisure. I can talk about Eastern leisure, but today we're focused on the West. In Western leisure, we're going to go to the Greeks, and leisure is known as skole. Skole. It's where we get our word school from eventually. But school wasn't about just learning facts and figures to be able to get a diploma. The school was forming you into becoming a fully human, a fully expression of humanity, which included politics, the neighborhood, neighbor, and your own education and philosophical outlook. Otium, when we get to it, is Roman. So when the Roman Empire comes, they take the Greek word skole and they redefine it to otium. We'll come to this in a minute. And they completely change what we understand as leisure. But it's leisure as you will relate to today. And then finally, we'll bring in the Jewish Sabbath understanding, which will lead us into our first century Christian understanding. So starting with mythology. So you remember the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus gets himself into all kinds of trouble. He cheats Hades. He cheats the dead. People aren't dying. He gets punished by Hades. And his punishment is to roll a rock right to the edge only for it to roll back down. And he does this constantly. And so it's labor without end, just labor, 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 and it never has an accomplishment. For those who want to think of a modern day example, whenever you talk about having a career in Latin, that means to go in a circle. So your career is really taking you nowhere. It's just circular. Whereas a vocation is the calling out in Latin. It's to draw you towards something else. Sisyphus is stuck in labor. He's constantly moving this back and forth. So the Greeks understood that, sometimes there's labor, just that's plain old labor, but it isn't going to take you to leisure. Then we have Hercules. Hercules was given, when he was a young man, he was given a choice. You can have a life of vice or a life of virtue. You can choose either one. Whichever one you choose, though, that will be your life. And so Hercules is completely tempted by a life of vice, where he can have drink and food and anything that he wants and just enjoy life, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die, as the scripture says. He chose to have virtue. And so when he made that choice, this is long before his 12 tasks happen. He chooses virtue, and he's growing in the virtues. There's 4 virtues in the Greek Greco-Roman world, but he's growing in these virtues. And then, of course, when he kills his wife and he has to do his atonement, he does all these 12 labors. He has to rely on his virtue to be able to accomplish all these tasks. And so the Greeks, the mythology again, they've got the Sisyphus myth about, you just work, but it doesn't take you anywhere. And then they have this next myth that say, okay, you're going to have a life of virtue or of vice. How are you going to live? And then we come to our favorite, Dionysus, the god of Dionysus. And of course, he is the god of pleasure and gluttony and all of these things. So we've got vice and virtue, we've got ease, we've got doing work, but it doesn't accomplish anything. And into all of these myths, we draw out philosophy. So here, if you were there in Athens, you can see the Acropolis at the top. You'd be down in the Stoa, the school, and this is where Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and so forth, they're meeting to talk about ideas. So they're taking all this mythology and they're starting to ask, what does it mean to be fully human? And as they're asking these questions, they are now asking about schole. They're talking about leisure. So Plato says you need to be free of the needs of the body, occupation, debt. Aristotle says you have to be free from necessity. And they start talking about leisure as contemplation, which includes virtue, but it brings a happiness, a flourishing. There's just one small problem with their idea of schole. You have to be male, you have to be free, and you free in terms of economics. You have to be wealthy, part of the elite, and male. And so this isn't going to apply to everyone, obviously. And so they are limited in what it is that they're thinking. But the idea of what they're contemplating is leading us somewhere else. It's who can actually engage in it where they're problematic. So they talk about the 4 virtues of courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, and controlling your passions. And the poets and the playwrights, they're beginning to pick up this leisure, but they're taking it as work and not work and starting to make fun of the elite. Oh, if only the elite can have leisure, then look at how they live. We wouldn't want to do that. As the Greek idea of schole begins to fade and the Roman Empire rises, Rome reinterprets this word schole and calls it otium. So as the Republic becomes an empire, otium becomes the point, but it's no longer interested in schole in terms of contemplation of the highest things. They are now interested, Cicero and Seneca in particular, the great philosophers, are interested in making private and public leisure. They're making it more the way we understand it today. So private leisure was for your own pleasure. So we have stories of people going walking and people going out on the water or going for picnics. But then there's public leisure. And this is the one you'll be able to relate to as soon as I give an example. The Pax Romana, Roman peace above all things. And so public leisure was based on manipulating and scripting for crowds what Roman peace was and what leisure would be. So, for example, if you went to a hockey game and heard the national anthem, in the Roman times, you would see Caesar or the representative Caesar come in as the trumpets blew and Roman peace, and people would pledge their allegiance to Rome and the Roman ways. And so Rome would put on gladiatorial games, they'd put in theater, they'd put on, but it was all public display to be able to help people enjoy their experience, but to remember who is in charge, and that was Rome. So they divide leisure to private leisure and public leisure. And so, again, we've got a big problem because it's all going to be based on the manipulation of a state, which we will then see very shortly when we come to the early Christian church. We have Jewish Sabbath. So we've got temple. So we know, we're going to come to pilgrimage second, but we know an awful lot of people, Jews would make their way 3 times a year, and they didn't have a concept of leisure. There's no word exactly for it, but we know from the creation story and on the 7th day he rested, and in this rest he said everything was good. We've got this, and then we've got the 10 Commandments coming, and we've got this idea of rest and stop production, stop making bricks, stop being a part of a system of consumption production, to quote Walter Brueggemann, and Walter was a big part of helping to write this chapter. So from there, with this understanding of leisure, we've got now inside the Roman world, we've got the Greek schole still around because people are studying the Greek philosophy. We've got the Roman experience of public and private. We've got Jewish understanding of Sabbath. And so Philo comes, this philosopher, a Jewish philosopher, he comes and he redefines Sabbath in the midst of the Roman Empire. He's a contemporary with Jesus. And so Philo says that Sabbath isn't just about refraining from things, that you can only walk so many cubits, you can only use this, you can't do this, you can do this, there's no flame, there's no... He says that Sabbath is a time to recreate, to celebrate with God in God's freedom. And with this, everything begins to shift. So with schole, otium, Sabbath, all happening in the Roman Empire, we're now in the 1st century, the Jesus movement begins. So we've got all these communities. Paul starts most of these communities, not the Roman church, obviously. But as Paul in Jerusalem, Damascus, Antioch, Galatia, all these communities that are being formed, Paul is walking into. And as he's walking into each of these communities, he's doing this in his leisure. He's now blending together all different aspects of leisure. He's taking the Greek of human flourishing as we get to be blessed in the Holy Spirit and our living God. And he's taking the Greek and the Roman, and he's saying, hang on a second, this public-private. Public is for worship, private's for devotion, and all of it is first to worship our living God, which is what makes us fully human, and second is look after the neighborhood, neighbor, and ourselves. So as he's going through, he's saying this whole bread and circuses, this whole idea that Caesar is going to give you your celebration of freedom and is going to give you bread for the DLD. Let me tell you another way. Let me tell you how else we can use our leisure, how else we can use our lives. You have to remember in the Roman Empire, there were no weekends. So the only times that were non-work days were during the times of the festivals. The other time that people could gather was after the midday. They could gather together when elite Romans would go to the baths, or Roman citizens go to the baths. Others would have time of rest, and then it would be dinner time. This is where we're coming to next. With St. Paul and the early Christian movement, we begin talking about the Holy Spirit as being a source of our leisure, of creating and recreating who we are. It's so important to note that it's a free gift, that everyone's included, and it's about healing and empowering. So a free gift. We don't have to pay a teacher to teach us about the early tradition. It's free of charge, as Dr. Vissy would say. This is a gift. Everyone's included. It's not based on your class, gender. The Holy Spirit will bless everyone to be able to engage in this leisure. And leisure is about healing the self, healing the neighborhood, and empowering us to make a difference. All of these things together redefine leisure. And it becomes, we're coming towards the end now, becomes a day, a meal, an engagement, all based in the Holy Spirit. So the first day of the week, we gather together. There are no weekends in the ancient world. The first day of the week is a work day. So when Mary makes her way to the tomb on Easter Sunday, she's going before work. She's on her way to go and grieve and say goodbye, and then she would be expected to go to work. There's no weekends. So the first day of the week, people would go to work. After work, so it's midday, they would gather together on the first day of the week, the day of the new creation, the 8th day. They would gather together. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. They would gather together and they would eat. And at their meal was also their worship. But that'll be the next slide. When they gather to have the meal and they begin their worship, it's free for all people. Everyone is to sit equal. They serve one another. There's no hierarchy. We know this from the Gospels. You know, if you're put in the high place, go to the low. If you're in the low, wait for them, bring you up. We remember all these things. But you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay to belong to this group. You don't have to pay for the meal. It's voluntary how it is you contribute, which brings us to the last thing. Because of the first day of the week, because of the meal, and because of the gift of the Holy Spirit, you choose in your leisure to look after the neighbor and the neighborhood. So in the first 3 centuries of Christendom, a lot of people were saying, why are you doing this? Why are you going from work to go and look after the poor? Why are you going from work and going to teach children how to read and write in Greek or in Latin? Why are you going to look after those prisoners? Why are you giving your clothes to people? Why are you doing this without charging? And it's no benefit to you. You're not gaining anything. You can see all of this in the scriptures. I don't have to give examples, but you can see all 3 of these things on top of the Holy Spirit infusing it all, shifting. So we went from leisure as contemplation of something we thought about in nous, and we were connected with the holy, the divine. We went to then from there to otium, where it's public and private, but it's for your own benefit generally, or for the benefit of the state. We've got the Jewish tradition of Sabbath, but it's peculiar to the Jewish people. Then we come to this early Christian time, where all of a sudden it's available to everyone based on a day, a meal, and engagement. So from there, we get in the early church, we know before Constantine, so before 312, 314, before the church becomes legal and we begin building all these sanctuaries, like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the church in Bethlehem, they weren't churches yet until Constantine. Before that, people were gathering in small groups throughout the empire. And we know there were 6, I know there's 5 on the slide. There are 6 things that we know were common to all the groups. We know that there was a cross, but they didn't think of the cross as crucifixion. They thought of the cross as God, our living God is more powerful than Caesar. Our living God is more powerful than death. The cross is not the end, even though it's absolute shame and disgrace. Our living God is more powerful than this and is with us. The bread and the cup, we take this for granted today, but the bread and the cup, the idea that people would eat together and share in an equal manner, is foreign in the first century, second century world. This is something that's very unique. And these early Christians saying, no, come, you can come sit beside me. No, you don't have to repay me. No, you don't have to pay to be at this meal. Yes, you can eat as much as you want, as much as we have. And yes, when the meal's over, we're going to package it up and send it to different people so that they have their daily bread. This whole meal that happens on the day when they gather together is transformative because they share with one another, but it's more than that. During the meal, there's storytelling and giving their testimony. So they're saying, this week we helped this couple. This week I had an experience of the holy. This week I remember the time when Jesus told this story of the feeding of 5,000. This week we are going to, and at this table, as they're parceling out bread, they might say, who's got a little bit of money? Because maybe we can buy this slave's freedom. Maybe we can get this person out of prison. Maybe we can help ease the tension for food for this group over here. At this meal, so much was happening, including, and he takes bread, giving thanks to God. He broke it and gave it to everyone. Caesar doesn't provide the bread. Our living God does. And they remember this every time they gather around a meal, the cup and the bread. So there's many, many things happening all at the same time. The one that's not on the screen is a candle. Most of the communities had oil lamps, and they remind us that light pushes away darkness. It doesn't need too much more explanation. They weren't afraid of the dark, and they were absolutely comfortable in the dark, but the living light of God was always in the midst of wherever they were, no matter how dark the night. The towel in the basin is a very important symbol, and it's a double symbol. First is of service. So we know that as followers of Jesus, that we are to love the neighborhood, and to love ourselves, whom we often forget because we have to be healthy as well. So the serving of the other. But the towel and basin is also baptism. It's also the entranceway into the community. You didn't have to pay to come in. But more than that, just think if Reverend John owned me, I was his slave, and he says, your name is Water Boy, because he can't say my name. He doesn't know who I am. And so my function and Water Boy, and all of a sudden I meet a group of people who say, if you're interested in following the way, if you come down to the water, we'll baptize you. And in your baptism, you'll be given a name. And we will call you by that name. And you belong with us. And we will remember your name even after you've died. And we'll continue praying for you as you keep praying for us. You can see this towel and basin, this entranceway in, that you receive a name. And it's a name that everyone will now honor you by. But there's another piece that we often forget as well. It's that if you were Jewish, the males would be circumcised and the whole household was included. In baptism, men and women, children, free, slave, Jew, Gentile, anyone who freely chooses to come into the waters can become a part of the community. This is transformative. The text, this one's self-explanatory. They would go through the scrolls and they would look for the instances of where they could see a Jesus event or where they could see God's promise and covenant that continued with them into the first, second, and third century. And the last one, the oil. If there was one symbol I think we need to recover more than all in our living out our leisure, is the oil. The oil is a double symbol. The first is, you remember the text in the psalm where the oil drips off the beard of Aaron. The oil was our anointing and sealing us after we're baptized. You are a child of God. You are loved beyond any telling of it. That's the one. The first part is that you're sealed in this promise that you're a child of God. The other half of the oil is healing. Now, I come from the Methodist side of the church, so people used to come to the rail and the elders would anoint you in oil when you were looking for prayer or strengthening or celebration. We don't do this anymore, but they still have this practice in Eastern Orthodoxy and in Catholicism, Anglicanism, some places, and some smatterings here and there. But the oil is the oil of healing. And when you think about that symbol for a minute, you're a child of God, loved beyond any telling of it. Oil. I seal you in this oil of healing as you grow into who you're becoming. It's so beautiful that they're together. So the cross, the bread and the cup, the towel and basin, the text, the candle, and the oil, all symbols in the early church, all things that help enable leisure. We then come to testimony. In testimony, we tell our stories, and we're not so great at this. I think we're the best kept secret in the universe. Early congregations would then communicate with one another incredible miracles or moments of greatness or moments of sorrow. Like how many times does St. Paul say, I'm a prisoner in chains, and yet I sing? The testimony, talking about how we're living out our faith. And I'll tell a brief story, and then I'm going to open up for questions in a second. When I was teaching in leisure studies at the University of Waterloo, I was in a class where it was all leisure, recreation and leisure studies. So these are all people that want to become, either managers of sports teams, or they want to go into kinetics, human kinetics, or they want to go in kinesiology, but they all want to do anything but the church, is what I've gathered. They were all in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s. And so I started teaching about, like I did here, the Greeks, and they were like, oh boy, this is terrible, because I was teaching them the history of leisure, which they weren't interested. They wanted the practical. How can I get a job? How can I get my career, my circular life? And so I was telling you about, this is about becoming fully human. And then the Romans do this, and you could see them going, oh my God, how long is this class? They're counting the tiles up in the ceiling. And then I get to the Jewish Sabbath, and you can see them like, what is this, Sunday school? Which many of them had never been to and knew very little about. Maybe their grandparents went to church. And you could see them all saying, this is useless. Why are we here? What a waste of a class. And then I got to Jesus. And you would think that that would be the deal breaker of all breakers. One woman in the front row looked at me and said, Jesus told stories. Tell us a story. She thought she was saving the class because to get the preacher to talk about, stories, and at least this will go a little faster. So I told the story of the lost sheep. No Christology, simple story. Guy had 100 sheep. One sheep went missing. Shepherd went to find it. Shepherd looked high and low in, I'm a preacher, so I told the story with a little bit of embellishment, and finally found the sheep. And the shepherd didn't yell at the sheep, didn't beat the sheep, didn't tell the sheep it was stupid, saw the sheep, loved it, put it on his shoulders, brought it back to the others for the celebration. This young woman sitting in the front row of a leisure studies class who was ready to be a great somebody is now in tears, pouring down her cheeks, both sides, almost sobbing. That feeling where your body begins to shake. And she looks at me and she says, I wish someone would find me. And the next thing I know, in this secular class, stories of being lost and found are throughout the whole classroom. Completely, the whole place is giving testimony of I was lost, I was found, I was lost. Now I'm going, oh man, how much longer is this class going to be? Church broke out in the middle because people were starving to hear about the longing, lost and found, about the aspects of our faith that we really don't talk much about, and often we don't live out that well either. So I go back to Metropolitan, where I was the minister, so mighty Metropolitan, and the lectionary was the lost sheep. And so I read the story, I told this story, and then I just stopped and I looked at everyone. I said, I know you're all waiting for me to give this great twist or turn, or to explain the Greek this, or, to, put a new light on the new evidence says this or that. I said, but, when did we lose the awe and wonder of being lost and being found? When did we lose the understanding of leisure, the understanding of this connection with the holy that just pours through us, and we can do nothing else but look after neighborhood, and ourselves, because that's how we're wired. And with the symbols as Christians, with these 6 symbols that we've been entrusted with. That's what Leisure Resurrected was about. Quick case study, and then open it up. So I took all this because it's one thing to tell you all these things and give you all this information that goes in your head. let me show you how we did it. We took this theory and we applied it. A church, United Church in London, Ontario, closed completely. This is what the church looked like. I was given 3 years to try out this theory. And so we were responsible for the bills and so forth, but the church closed. I was given the building for a 3-year period to try something out. So we emptied the building so we could use the space in the community. As soon as we emptied the building, we began. We began with incredible community engagement. The first group that we touched base with this consistory. And so a consistory is a place where you can get medical equipment. And so once we got the consistory, this is a picture of wheelchairs and crutches and bedpans and beds themselves. We brought them in and we said to the City of London, anyone who needs equipment, medical equipment, you can come here for free and get what it is that you need, like the oil of healing. What is it that you need to help you as you heal? And so there's a ton of volunteers. And because we were partnering with another group, it became a stream of revenue as well, so that we could meet our costs for running this building. So the consistory in place, the whole city bringing us equipment and us cleaning it, repurposing it, and sending it out. I can't begin to tell you the ministry, just that alone was worth. Because it was a day, a meal, and activity engagement, we chose not to worship on Sunday. We chose Wednesday night, Wednesday at 7. We knew we couldn't choose Thursday because it's choir night in Canada, and Tuesday and Monday were too soon. So Wednesday was our day. So we were able to use the space for another congregation, if not many different congregations. In this space, we had a mosque, a synagogue, and you can see this Filipino congregation that were in line with our values of the United Church. And so we were able to begin a partnership. It was not a rental. They helped us. You're going to see in a minute the garden we started. They helped with the consistory. They helped with the property. They helped with the cleaning. They helped with, and then I would go and worship with them. They would come and worship with us, and their pastor got to know, and our pastor got to know. We began language lessons. We began things with homework clubs. We began all kinds of partnerships that were all spin-offs. But they used our church Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they gave an offering, which helped keep the church open so that we could have this at cost recovery. Next, we started this 10 years. This has been going on for 10 years, the Inviting Circle. Because for those who are United Church, we knew we were moving to a regional model. We didn't know what it was going to look like, but we knew we were leaving presbyteries. And we're going to be going into another way of governing. We started every Wednesday morning at 9 till 10:30, inviting anyone who was in leadership in the United Church or Anglican or Lutheran, anyone who was in leadership in the mainline denominations who were interested to come to Inviting Circle. So every second Wednesday, 2 Wednesdays a week, there were no meetings around money and this and that and the other. You came, we worshiped for 45 minutes, and then for 45 minutes we had education. So again, picking up the Greek skole idea. And so what is it that first we worship? And so someone would give a 7-minute sermon, and we were harsh on 7 minutes because there were all a bunch of preachers in the room. And we would then give what was happening in the community, what we were praying for each other, just connecting. And then we would have something to eat, of course, together. And then the second half was practical skills, anger management, how to read a spreadsheet. Maybe it was MAID. We spent many, many weeks bringing doctors and nurses in to help us to learn about MAID or aging, or what's the process for going through into retirement homes or PTSD or whatever it was education based. So we did this every second Wednesday. We get about 20 people that would make their way to that. Wednesday night was our worship service. And so it was completely based on what the thesis was that I wrote my book about. We worshiped on a day, we ate together, and then we worshiped. But the service was completely participatory. Everyone was able to give a testimony to what was happening, whether it was as simple as I noticed a bird in the sky and it made me feel happy. That was enough, to people saying, I felt the Holy Spirit flow through me or somebody died and I don't know what to do, or like testimony. People's lives were then shared around the table. in this time, and for introverts, they were able to bring painting or poetry or writing, or they could just make symbols. Or so we were trying to incorporate all different kinds of people, all different kinds of music, and it was very, as I said, very inclusive and participatory. We then started a garden. So you can see in the top right, the Fairmont Garden. It was a parking lot that was an enormous parking lot. So we said, okay, so how can this neighborhood community help nourish the city of London? And so we put in this enormous garden. And in the garden, we are able to provide almost all the fresh produce that's necessary for the city of London for people to be able to eat once a week fresh produce. And so we took this and we made it into a model. So any church that had land, they could grow tomatoes. Another could grow spinach. Another could grow. So we had the main garden, but then we were able to send people out to help individual churches to do just one part of the garden that was able to help the whole. This garden now is completely leisure activity by the whole neighborhood. And this parking lot was a place that you would go to get high, get laid, to go get up to no good. Now the community all has ownership in this place and a huge sense of we are making a difference. And it's all people. It doesn't matter if they believe or not. They're all in the garden together, kind of what I think God intended. Which brings me to the last part of, in this place, we started education. So we did everything from community groups to voting stations to model trains to yoga, dance. We had wheelchair soccer, wheelchair basketball. We had all kinds of groups in this place. And then we started hosting our conferences there. So John was there in this place when we had Revitalize, and we brought Canadian leaders that were in Canadian contexts to come. You didn't have to be Canadian. You had to be in a Canadian context to come and share part of your story. 26 speakers. We did this for over 10 years. 26 speakers coming to share for 45 minutes their experiences, but they had to include their failures. What did you learn? That was probably the most important part. Where didn't it work? And what did you learn? And what can we learn from it? So all of that is to bring you to Leisure Resurrected. And this is what we started with mythology, with Sisyphus bringing the stone up, to the philosophers talking about Scoli, to the Roman Empire, dividing it into otium, to the Jews reminding us of the holy Sabbath of rest in the midst of work, to the early Christians talking about flourishing and bringing all these things together, which then ending this part and stopping my share screen, ending this part brings us to today, which is we congregations have this incredible opportunity to be centers for leisure, to help people to realize it's not coming to church to work or to be on a committee to do work or to give more as a unit of production. We have an opportunity to how are we going to help people flourish in their leisure? And I'll stop right there.
Amazing, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, that's just half.
I know.
What
I
time is
know.
it? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I got going there.
You're a preacher, Jeff. What can we
Sorry
say?
guys.
It
It's only
happens.
10
It
minutes
happens.
left. I can talk about pilgrimage. I'm just about to finish the book on pilgrimage next.
Let's see if anyone has any reflections on what you've shared. I think it's a really interesting model. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm going to get it soon, and
Just
and
read
we'll go
chapter
through it.
10. That's all you
Just
need to read. Chapter 10 is the practical one.
there
And
you
it's a
go.
perfect size to balance your table.
Nice, nice. Anyone want to offer anything on reflections or thoughts? The room is yours.
Jeff, can you explain how your concept of leisure ties in with the concept of worship?
So worship in leisure, for the understanding of leisure, worship is the highest part of being human, is when we are in transcendence with our living God. When we're giving thanks, praise, honor to our living God, that is the most purest form of leisure in the ancient world, right? And so that's where that comes from. And for us today, I think we all would agree that that is still the case, that our living God and giving thanks and gratitude for that is where we get our source of, first we say thank you, and then we're entrusted with what are we going to do with it? And that's where the practical leisure, engaging our leisure comes from. But first we have to connect.
Okay. Because I think we struggle in our church life because we don't associate leisure with worship.
Yeah.
And very often we tie it down to an activity we do on Sunday mornings.
Right. Which is one of many activities. So you can go to hockey, you can go to soccer, you can go to the mall, or you can
Yeah.
go to church, and they make it like they're all equal. And this is not to say we have to help people understand that it's not just choosing one of the many activities you could do on a Sunday. It's about being fully human. And I'm going to go, like, I'm a Christian. I'm Trinitarian. Christianity is my way of expressing my understanding of this. But you can go to temple, mosque, synagogue, and still be in this leisure.
I was just going to say, I'm curious how you built the team around you with the initial vision, and how you cast that vision and found those people.
So, and first, it was it was in my leisure. So I teach at Huron University. I'm a professor of homiletics, and I had met a very large, complicated congregation. I did this in my free time. Some people jog, some people read, and so it started with just me. And what I did is I applied for some grants, and I got a grant for a musician. And once it was me and a musician, and then I said to all my colleagues, I have a empty church. How are we going to share this space? And so I started with like-minded colleagues, and a few Met people said, the Metropolitan, the church I was serving, a few of them said, I'm willing to help with the garden. I'm willing to help with the consistory. I'm willing. And so that's how it began. But it began with me by myself thinking, what am I doing? This is never going to last. It was kind of Jonah, like, oh man, just give me a reason. I'll close the whole thing down because I don't need this. And then it just started to happen. And as one person had the experience, it started to grow because there were no boards. It was all run, the governance was all run by Met. So this congregation was purely a worship and engagement congregation. So it began just by me. Now I'm not there anymore, and the congregation is still flourishing because it was all participatory. So that wasn't reliant on me to run it. It became a community. And now it takes a few people to have governance, to make sure the bills are paid. But outside of that, the people run the place. Is that answering what you're asking?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
That's how.
Yeah, and I've seen a few congregations considering maybe not necessarily what you in particular have done, but that idea of one congregation taking on another congregation that is dying or closing or ending its life cycle, and having that as a satellite space. And often the conversation that I hear, at least in the Presbyterian circles, is often, what are we going to do with this thing? And so you've created a beautiful way of the potential for animating that space and giving it new life and a new opportunity to be church differently.
We called them campuses because we didn't want to get into which building are we keeping. That's the biggest fight you're going to have. Who's the minister? Which building do we keep? Once you have campuses, then you get away from that because you've got a South campus, an East campus, a West campus. And with a campus, because I'm against selling all of our property. Like, it drives me nuts watching us give up this prime real estate that then becomes the growing edge of whatever community you're in. And now we have no footprint in it. If you don't have worship a Sunday at 11, you can do all kinds of things. But if you are stuck on Sunday at 11, so here in Toronto, I brought all 8 Bloor Street churches together. No one wants to give up Sunday morning worship, not one. And so we're all going to close together with our 11 o'clock Sunday morning worship. If some of them would say, we're going to do Wednesday, we're going to do Thursday, we're going to do Saturday morning, and then be able to offer different things to different groups of people who have different lives, we probably all could flourish together. So first thing is campuses. We started with campuses, not satellites. And we didn't talk amalgamation. We just simply said, how can we use this space?
Yeah, and I didn't have the capacity to do this or the leisure, or I wasn't allocating my leisure accordingly, Jeff. But I can remember having many conversations with the congregation I served for 20 years around, I even boldly suggested to my leadership, and they thought I was insane. I said, we got to stop worshiping on Sundays. It's like we're in the restaurant business, and every restaurant opens at Sunday at 11. And it's like, this is silly. Why couldn't we think of doing this differently? And then what would we do? There was a real perception, because there is an idolatry of Sunday morning. I understand it, that's how we've created it from the ancient times on some level, that there was this notion that
Since Constantine.
you must worship on a Sunday, but still there's a sense of this idolatry, and the amount of investment we would put into a Sunday morning worship. Like, so many churches have a staff team that is solely responsible for Sunday morning worship, and that's it. And it's such a huge investment. But I never got there. They thought I was crazy, and it didn't happen.
Add
So
to that,
I think
it's, for many congregations, and this is not to be cutting, because I'm a part of it too. I put myself in this. It's performance.
Mm-hmm.
How much equipping of lay people and testimony do we do every week? I include myself in this. So no, I'm speaking of myself. Wednesday night, it was run by the community telling their stories. And we keep here where I am now. We're working towards that. But it's hard because it's not what people want, and they're not used to it, and it's uncomfortable. But if we don't learn it, what are we going to do? The story belongs to the people, not to the Constantinian paid clergy.
We need to do many things, like we need to undo many things. So the Sunday worship came from understanding of Sabbath to be on Sunday. So that from 10 commandments, we have to observe, 10 commandments, the Sabbath.
Was Friday night to Saturday. Sunday comes from the first day of the week, comes from the 8th day. So
anyway, so that's what I mean. Like, we have to undo that understanding, so it's so embedded in our tradition that Sunday is the day of the Sabbath, right? So anyway, I grew up in Korea, and we had Wednesday worship service all the time, and then Sunday worship as well. Many services on Sunday, and then Sunday evening service as well. Friday prayer meetings, and early morning prayer meetings every day. So I think the more we get together outside of Sunday, I think it will the churches will flourish. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Well, Jeff, we've almost come to our time.
I'm sorry I spoke the whole time. I didn't keep an eye on the time. Sorry.
It's called
I was
We
going
Need
to talk
to
about
Listen.
pilgrimage too.
It's called We Need to Listen. So we're doing some really good listening. Jeff, did you want to give a very quick plug for a pilgrimage kind of world that you were in, or
no? I've said more than enough.
You're good.
I just want you to I'm a preacher just like you guys. Like, it's hard, and it's a hard time, but I think if we recapture this idea of leisure, this idea that there's something bigger that we're a part of, I think all of a sudden things shift. Especially when we dip into our 6 symbols that are ours, to have people be able to talk about what does it mean to be welcomed, to be healed, to have a story. Anyway, I could go on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Jeff. I want to thank you for being with us. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And some of you, I think, know Jeff from before, and you're new to me. But if you're looking for other times to listen to things or to get resourced in different ways, ministryforum.ca. The Center for Lifelong Learning at Knox College is here for everybody, and so we're happy to support all those who seek to do ministry and are called out from that circle. I love that image, Jeff. Are called out from that circle to do the work of ministry, to bring good news where we can. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you all, and take care, whatever the rest of the day looks like.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy your leisure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Ministry Forum podcast. We hope today's episode encouraged you and reminded you that you are not alone in ministry. If this episode resonated, tell someone. Please don't keep us a secret. And if you can, subscribe, rate, or leave a review wherever you listen. It helps us reach more ministry leaders just like you. And honestly, it reminds us that we're not alone either. Find more resources and ways to connect at ministryforum.ca and follow us on social media at Ministry Forum. Until next time, may God's strength and courage be yours. May you be fearless, not reckless. And may you be well in body, mind, and spirit. And may you be